Welcome back to Z-Speed and thanks for tuning back in. Today we're going to drain and fill this automatic transmission on this 2006 Honda Accord. There's also a small little transmission fluid filter inside the engine bay, and we're going to go ahead and replace that as well. So if this is something you're interested in, stay tuned and we'll get right on it. Now before we get started, I'm going to show you a little trick that I like to do when I'm draining transmission fluid, and that is to use 4 jack stands to completely lift the entire car off the ground so you can get underneath it. And then what I've done is also dipped the nose down just a little bit so you get a little bit more fluid accumulation in the transmission pan itself. And so this will allow us to get the maximum amount of fluid out. And you don't necessarily have to do this. You can use a pair of ramps if you have to on the front, or just 2 jack stands in the front. But if you do have 4, try this method. You might get just a little bit more transmission fluid out. Now that you've got your car up on jack stands or whatever method you've chosen, it's time to locate the drain plug for the transmission. And Honda made it super simple for us. You can see the outer case for the transmission is all in silver right here, so it's right up front and easy to access. Now I'm going to try to get a little better view of the bolt that we're going to break loose, but right here to the left is your pan, your oil pan. You see it's all in black right here. I'm sure you're familiar with that if you've changed your oil. But let me get a better shot of this bolt. It's not a traditional bolt that you can put a socket on. Rather, you take a 3/8 inch ratchet and pop it straight into this little hole, and you're gonna break it loose that way. This thing's got 36 foot-pounds of torque, so it is in there pretty solid, so you may have to really tug at it, but we've got a lot of room to work with here, so it should make it fairly simple. I used a 1/2 inch breaker bar with a little 3/8 inch converter right on top of that. And then you can see I've got an extension on that. I'm going to recommend that you don't put the extension on there though, because when I broke this thing loose, I actually twisted that extension and destroyed it. So it's quite a bit of torque, 36 foot-pounds of torque, and it may bend an extension if you use that. Make sure you have your drain pan ready to go as well. Now, I forgot to mention this earlier, but you do want to have your transmission fluid warmed up. Now, we don't want it piping hot because we don't want to burn our hands, but drive it around a little bit, warm it up, and that'll just aid on removing a little bit more transmission fluid from the pan. Now, you can see I struggled a little bit to get that loose, but I finally did break it loose, and now we're ready to drain it. Now, Honda recommends that you change the transmission fluid every 60,000 miles. I picked this car up used with 190,000 miles, so I should theoretically be on my 3rd fluid change. You can see the fluid's a little dark here. I'm not sure exactly when it was changed last, but the transmission seems to be shifting just fine right now. Now, I'm going to recommend that you use only genuine Honda transmission fluid at this point. I don't really like to mix any aftermarket fluids with my factory transmission fluid because of compatibility problems. Lots of the aftermarket transmission fluids have different types of conditioners, and they're not always compatible with the original. So do yourself a favor, and if you want to keep your transmission running well, don't ever mix any aftermarket fluids. And if you're wondering, it was pretty cheap. It was only 44 bucks at Honda, and I also got a little washer with it. So not too expensive. You can also order it from Amazon if you want to. Now, while we're waiting for our transmission fluid to completely drain out, we're gonna go ahead and clean up our drain plug. You can see we've got quite a bit of black sludge on the end of this magnet. Now, Honda's got a great design on their drain plug. It's got a huge magnet on the end of here, and it's really done a great job. You can see it's collected quite a bit of black sludge, and it's really not black sludge, it's super fine metal particles that is pulled out of the transmission fluid as it circulates by. And it's really done a great job at accumulating quite a bit of small particles here. and that's what we want to see. We want to see that pulled out by the magnet so that it doesn't recirculate through the transmission and cause more damage. So take your time, clean this little magnet up, get it spotless here, and then we can go ahead and change out our little washer as well. But let me wipe it all off here, and I'm going to show you this completely different color. Once you clean it up, you'd be amazed at how much sludge I found on mine, but it's quite a bit of a different color once you get it all wiped down. Let me see if I can get a better shot. There you go. That's what it should look like. So we've got that all cleaned up. Now we're going to go ahead and replace this little aluminum washer on the bottom here, and you can take a flathead screwdriver, pull that off, and it's really easy to change out. And I don't know if you can see this on camera, but there's a little crease around this aluminum washer, so you definitely want to change this out while you're doing this job, because they're very cheap and you can pick one up while you're grabbing your transmission fluid from Honda. So now that you've got your drain plug all cleaned up and you've got a new little washer on there, it's time to torque it back down to 36 foot-pounds. And remember earlier I told you that I'd actually bent my extension that I placed on my torque wrench. So you may want to try to fit your torque wrench in there without the extension, but then again you might need one to clear this area, so it's up to you. But I did actually bend my extension. Okay, now we're in the engine bay and it's time to refill the transmission fluid, and I'm going to use an extended funnel and place it right here in the dipstick tube. It gives the funnel a lot of support and it makes it really easy to get to. Now the Honda does have a fill bolt way down in there somewhere. I'm not even going to show you that because this is such a easy way to go right here. It's a much better method, I believe, and it really helps support your funnel and keeps it from moving around while you're refilling. I came up with 3.1 quarts is what I need to refill after I measured everything out. So now let's get started on the refill process. Once you're finished filling your transmission fluid, you're ready to remove the funnel and replace the dipstick. Now there's a little tab on top of the dipstick that has to line up with a metal tab on the dipstick tube. I'm going to show you this little tab real quick. Right there, you can see that little tab. That has to line up properly or it won't seat correctly. So take your time, make sure you've got that lined up. You can see I'm kind of fumbling around a little bit. I had trouble lining it up, but it'll seat real tight once you get it lined up correctly. Now, as far as this filter goes, I purchased mine from Amazon for under 20 bucks. You can also pick them up at Honda. And as far as the maintenance book goes, it doesn't really give you a frequency on when to change these out, but I would go ahead and change it out every time you change your transmission fluid, because we want to keep that fluid as clean as possible. And this little filter is pretty cheap and not too hard to change. I'm going to show you where it's located. It's pretty easy to visualize, but there's not a lot of working room down here. And you can see it's right here, easy to access, except it's these little hose clamps right here. These hose clamps are difficult to get loose because there's not a lot of room to get a pair of pliers in there. So that was a bit of a challenge, but you can see the little brace that goes over the top of the filter, and it's only held in with one 10 mil bolt right there. You loosen that up and the whole brace lifts up and it clicks in on the other side. So there's just one bolt. The other side just kind of clicks in there. So that's the easy part to remove. Okay, just take your time when you're releasing the 10 millimeter bolt. Don't drop it. I ended up loosening it up and then I fished it out with a magnet. And then you can go in and grab this little brace. And like I said, it clicks in on one side. So you just basically get your hand down in there, lift up on it, and it just kind of slides out of the other side. And I'm going to show you the little end right here. This little tab right here, you can see at the very end, just kind of locks in on the other side. Pretty easy to remove, not a big problem at all. The big problem was removing those two little hose clamps, and I used this big pair of vice grips. That was the only thing that I could actually get around these two little clamps to open them up so I could slide them down and out of the way. I used every other type of needle nose pliers that I had, small ones, large ones, you name it. I used just about everything I had in my arsenal and ended up using the vice grips. Those were the best at grabbing a hold of that and releasing those. So you may have to experiment to get those little clamps loose. Try the large vice grips if you have them. And you can see I'm putting my arm underneath this air tube right here, and then my right hand is grabbing the little filter, and I'm just kind of tugging away on the hose, and boom, it comes loose. Took a little bit of time, but not too hard, and I was able to remove the filter, and you can see the orientation right here. Make sure it goes back in this way. So this came out pretty easily once I got the hose clamps off. Okay, let me show you exactly what it looks like after I've removed the filter, and let me get a better view. Here it goes right here. These are the two hoses that you're just gonna pop your new filter into. And like I said earlier, the hardest part was just removing these two hose clamps. And once you get those loose, boom, it's super easy to break that filter loose. So now I'm just gonna go ahead and place my new filter in, and then grab my hose clamps and slide them back into position. Now once you get your filter back in and your hoses and clamps positioned correctly, all we have left to do is place that brace that goes over the filter. Now this brace kind of keeps this filter from moving around or vibrating. So you just click in one side, like I showed you earlier. It's this little tab that clicks in, and the other side's bolted down with a 10mm bolt, and then you're all done. At this point, you want to go ahead and start the engine, bring it up to operating temperature for a little bit, and then we're going to recheck the fluid level to make sure we don't have to add any more transmission fluid. So if this video helped you out, please like and subscribe, and leave a comment below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. It was a beautiful day out here in Alabama, so I decided to go for a little tunnel run, and I'm going to leave you with that at the end. But until next time, just keep on repairing.